Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Frieden, and I am the acting director of the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, which is the sponsor of this, the Weatherhead Center's 23rd Samuel and Elizabeth Jodidi Lecture. The Jodidi Lecture series was designed to be a distinguished opportunity for learning and conversation at this university. It was established in 1955, and the series provides for, I'm quoting from the terms, the delivery of lectures by eminent and well-qualified persons for the promotion of tolerance, understanding, and goodwill among nations and the peace of the world. We've had an array of sterling speakers over the years, including important national leaders like Andreas Papandreou, Lee Kuan Yew, Rajiv Gandhi, Corazon Aquino, then people who have been leaders of international institutions like Javier Pérez de Cuellar and Richard Goldstone, diplomatic strategists like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Abba Eban, and even a provocative thinker and writer, V.S. Naipaul. Today, we're very happy to have Avram Burg with us. And let me say a few words about Mr. Burg. Avram Burg served as a lieutenant in the paratrooper brigade of the Israel Defense Forces. He rose to public attention in 1982, protesting the war in Lebanon as a member of Peace Now, then served as an advisor to Prime Minister Shimon Peres on diaspora affairs. He was elected to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, in 1988, and served as Speaker of the Knesset from 1999 to 2003. Among other things, Mr. Burg has been chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. He was a co-founder of Molad, which is a progressive think tank dedicated to advancing Israeli democracy. He's been chairman of Mifalot, a Sports for Peace project, international coordinator of the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue in Vienna. He's also been an instructor at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Since that's not enough, he's written about a half a dozen books over the course of his career. The most recent of which is very near to you, Human Readings of the Torah, which came out last year. And I can note, having some knowledge of this, that to many Israelis, Mr. Burg is perhaps best known as a weekly commentator on Torah readings. Before that, he wrote a book which was widely read and widely reviewed in 2008 called The Holocaust is Over, We Must Rise from Its Ashes, in which he described a path through which he believed the Jewish people might find greater peace and security in the Middle East and in the world. So I'll turn the podium over to Mr. Burg and his Jodidi lecture in just a moment, but first let me say a few things about the Weatherhead Center and our engagement in the fraught nature of politics in the Middle East and this topic. Of course, the work of reconciliation is difficult and charged with emotion. The Weatherhead Center has a long, 35-year history, in fact, of working with scholars and others to illuminate the issues associated with the Middle East. This has been led for many years by Professor Herb Kelman, who is with us today. The mantle that he founded, if you can found a mantle, was then carried on in his Middle East seminar by Lenore Martin and Sarah Roy, who have brought together under the auspices of the Middle East Seminar a large number of thinkers and policymakers interested in the area. And as a center, we have really continually tried to bring together those who can engage with both the academic and the policy issues that continue to beset the Middle East. I also want to be sure to include an appreciation of Pamela Steiner, Pamela in the audience back there, who is co-director of the Intercommunal Trust Building Project of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and a fellow of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at the School of Public Health. It was her inspiration to bring Avram Burg to us today. So as we talk about this difficult subject, I hope that you will all keep in mind that the purpose of the lecture is to engage in informed, intelligent, and friendly discussion of complex issues. And in that spirit, I will turn the podium over to Avram Burg.
The only thing I promise is friendly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of those, from Pamela's idea to Jeff's introduction through Steve's tireless efforts to bring a stiff-necked individual like me over here. It's a privilege. It's more than a privilege. It's a kind of a compliment. And if this evening will go so-and-so, I even put it in my resume. I'm really happy to be here. And I have a feeling that through the conversations and all the preparations we've had, that in a way, what I can expect in an evening like this is less of this kind of high rhetorics, beautiful demagoguery, which I'm used to because I was born into it, etc., and much more into sharing. And this into sharing is actually not just sharing some of ideas, but sharing some of the new places in which individuals like myself find themselves in the last couple of years, saying, actually, the mainstream is not there for us anymore. There was somebody, an Israeli poet who borrowed something for some international other poet who said, only dead fish are swimming with the stream. It looks like that the mainstream in Israel is heavily saturated with this kind of swimming fish. I find it a bit boring. So it's sharing the swimming this evening. The topic of the evening is Israel and Palestine from iconic conflict to an iconic solution, or is it a time for new paradigms? The short answer is yes. Now I want to give you some details. I have a feeling, and if you'll tell me it's a kind of arrogance or a kind of egocentric Israeli, typical Israeli approach, I have a feeling that the world, the universe is actually circling around us. I've no doubt about it, actually, that everybody around the world wakes up in the morning and says, what's going on with this Israel? And actually, when you check it around, I mean, when you look at the statistics of nations and states and countries and affairs being mentioned at the New York Times, so it's United States, Canada, Russia, maybe China recently, they are becoming place, okay? And then Israel. And or you look at about nations or places or economies who are traded at NASDAQ, 1, 2, 3, and then we come, etc., etc., etc. So you ask yourself, what is it? I mean, I don't know how many Mongols are there in the world. I take it some 25,000 billion. You don't read about them. I mean, how many we are? You don't stop reading about us. So what is it? Part of it has to do with an attitude. Here is Moshe. Moshe was bar mitzvahed. Bar mitzvah is a verb in English, right? So Moshe was bar mitzvahed. And for his bar mitzvah, his parents bought him a beautiful present, which is a trip around the world, i.e., in spoken Israeli, it means 10 days charter flight to Europe. So here Moshe goes with his father to a charter flight around Europe. Every day they go to a new place. Every day they visit a place. First day, the Charles de Gaulle airport in Paris. They walk out of the airport. So Moshe turns to his father and says, Daddy, tell me, are all the people around here Jewish? So he said, of course not. They're goyim. He said, okay, goyim, no problem. They see Paris, they take off. Next day, it's Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome. They go out of the airport. Moshe turns to his father and says, Daddy, tell me, are all the people around here Jewish? He said, oh, no. They're all Gentiles. He said, okay, Gentiles, no problem. Next day, it's at the Kloten Airport in Zurich. Abba, Daddy, tell me, all the people here Jewish? He said, no, they're all non-Jews, etc., for 10 days. Here is the last day. That's it. Okay, they're at the Heathrow Airport in London. They walk out of the airport. Moshe turns to his father and says, Daddy, tell me, are all the people around here Jewish? He said, Moshe, what's wrong with you? I told you time and again, they're Gentiles, they're not Jews, they're Goyim. No, they're not Jews. Said Moshe, poor Goyim, they're so spread around the world. Now, this sense of who is centered and who is spread is something, we have some problems with our optics, to tell you the truth, okay? But yes, sometimes we have the feeling that with this biased optics, we're kind of a center. So you ask yourself, what is so centric? What is the magnet? What happens? I can give you many explanations. Each and every one of them will require a new invitation for an evening like this, which I'm pitching now, okay? But let's see how it works. The first is no doubt the theological challenge. Both the Christian and the Muslim world should have some, are having some theological issues with this rebirth of the state of Israel. Just think about some Christian dogmas in which there was the old Israelite, which is the Old Testament, blessed by God. Then we sinned, the blessing was taken, removed, and given through the New Testament to the new church, and we were whatever we were. Now, 2,000 years later, we're back to business, and it looks like, as difficult as it is, that either the blessing is back home or it's splitted. What does that mean, dogmatically speaking, that God divided his blessing or her blessing? It's a challenge. It's a challenge for the Muslims as well. It's a challenge theologically, by the way, for Jews nonetheless. So the first, since our reality here in America and in the West and in the Middle East is so heavily saturated with religious dimensions, so the theological challenge is there. The second has to do with some kind of historic curiosity. I take it many, those who are having some historic conscience or awareness or just curiosity, wonder what will happen or what might happen or what is happening to yesterday's victim when he becomes capable. Is it possible for an abused child to break the pathological circle and to become a nonviolent parent? Is it possible? The jury is still out, but the challenge is there. And the last but not least is actually checking us by our own standards. And this is asking, are the standards, the highest standards raised by Jews all during history, demanding the rest of humanity to behave differently, will these high standards will be met by the same people, or will they become double standards? So when you take this, it's about history and psychology and theology and just politics. It's interesting. It's fascinating. Let's look into it. Let's have a look. So people are very interested. I have a feeling that when you put all of this together and put it aside together, there is another dimension. The conflict between us and the Palestinian became a very, very interesting, iconic one. It is not just us who iconize something, it is the whole package, which stands for so many things. When you listen, when you read the first press releases of bin Laden in Kenya at the time and in Yemen, etc., so he mentions few things why he does it, why he did it, and then the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When you look at some radical groups at the Far East, you ask them why they do it, because of the occupation. When you look at some radical actions and political actions in Europe and even here, the occupation is an issue. So it is not just about us, it's something much wider. We have issues in Egypt nowadays. We have issues with Turkey. We have issues with Syria. Let's solve the Palestinian issue. Why? Because it is larger than just itself. It represents, it stands for something bigger than that. And you have a feeling that maybe one of the elements, one of the components, one of the ingredients of this iconic conflict has to do with a point of time in history. My father used to say that the education of the individual begins 100 years before he's born or she's born. And in a way, it's right. I mean, nothing starts with me. Everything begins before me, goes through me, and then continues after me or after us. So when you look at the reality, sometimes it's better to open your perspectives, to open your shutters, and to look around and say, where did it start? Where does it go? Where it stands? So it's not just here and now. It is something wider than this. And I would like to argue that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, in a way, the focal point of the new kind of conflicts in the world. New in what sense? The watershed I would like to offer for this afternoon, and you can have as many watersheds as you want, but this one serves my argument, so I'll take this one, is the Second World War. You have a feeling that the Second World War was a kind of a watershed between the previous world order and the new world order. Not just the understanding or the comprehension of many that the exploitation or the utilization of power and might and muscles and violence at the service of a cause actually exhausted itself or was overused and therefore abused the right to use power at all or almost at all, but mainly because the world ever since is differently organized. A word about patrons. I have a feeling that we are living in a period of 300 centuries. It's not about our century alone. The 19th century was a century in which the first world invaded the third world, invaded, exploited, abused, etc., etc., etc. The 20th century, almost at the middle of it, was the century of disengagement, which is the first world came back home. England from the colonies, France from the colonies, etc., etc., etc. And it looks like the 21st century is the century in which the third world invades the first world, loaded with anger, loaded with memories, and loaded with frustration. So this is the pattern into which we are talking about what we have here. And the Second World War is the turning point between the previous world order of the 19th century, first one invading the third one, and the 21st century, the third one coming or going back or reinvading the first one. What was left actually after the end of the Second World War? What was resolved, we know. What was left was a divided Europe, the Cold War, etc., the communist bloc versus the democratic Europe, Africa, India, Pakistan, Indochina, Sahara, various places. And then you ask yourself, can I give a date in which the Second World War was officially ended? For me, it is December 1987. When the walls came down in Berlin. I mean, an ocean liner doesn't stop immediately. It takes a while. I mean, okay, the captain says stop it, so you stop it. So it takes a couple of more miles to stop. So it took the world a couple of more decades to stop the conflicts of the pre and during the Second World War, of the first half of the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. Then it stopped. And the wall came down. And when the wall came down, now I do not know whether it was in conjunction with it or just an accidental occurrence, but when the wall came down, actually three iconic conflicts started the march or began to walk towards iconic solution. The old ancient Catholic Protestant conflict in North Ireland, which at that time was wider than just Northern Ireland, but was eventually narrowed down to the iconic conflict over there, more or less succeeded. The iconic conflict of a couple of hundreds of years of South Africa between black and white, First World and Second World, and Third World, and Oslo was launched. At that time, I didn't feel as the one who was one of the first ones to begin the process towards Oslo and a serious supporter of it politically and actively, I had a feeling that they are all the same. Northern Ireland, South Africa, us and the Palestinians are all the same. I'm not at all sure anymore. I think they are different. I think that ours belongs to the new set of conflicts rather than to the previous world order conflicts. In what sense? When the wall came down in Berlin, there were two papers put on the international table for discussion. Francis Fukuyama, End of History. I'm still waiting. I mean, okay, maybe one day it will come. Maybe in my term, maybe not, but it's not yet here. And the second was Samuel Huntington, right? The Clash of Civilizations. The Clash of Civilization, there he argued that actually what we witnessed during the 19th and 20th century, a conflict between states and nations over territorial and economic interests, is not to be the drivers behind the future conflicts, because the future conflicts will be driven by cultural, religious, faith conflicts. And the first one around our corner is Demo-Christianity versus Islam. Not here and not now, maybe later if we will have time during Q&As or whatever, I will argue the thesis itself. But nonetheless, this Demo-Christianity versus Islam, like all of us versus all of them, was a kind of a background or a carrier even for the crusades of George W. Bush. All of us versus all of them. Very simple, very binary, very black and white, very clear. I was impressed that there is a president in America who knows who were the crusades. Nonetheless, the world was a little bit less impressed, okay? And here we go. We go out and we have this conflict that at the tip of it, of this Demo-Judeo-Christianity, in the Muslim world, the friction between the Israelis and the Palestinians is it. It's not as ancient as the Catholic Protestant one. It's not as old and loaded as the black and white one or European Africans. It is something new. It belongs to the new reading of Huntington. So what's the conflict is all about? I do not believe that the conflict is really a conflict about the real estate. Everybody knows what is the solution. 67 lines, the vision of Jerusalem, Temple Mount, refugees, you name it. We know it. It is there for a generation. Recently, even the Israeli Prime Minister recognized it by accepting, at least rhetorically, the formula of the two-state solution. So if everybody knows what is the solution, and everybody knows that the situation is not getting better with the time, why doesn't it happen? What prevents it? What are the obstacles? What are the hurdles that do not allow neither us nor them to jump over and get to the promised land? A lot of it has to do with psychopolitics and history politics rather than politics itself. Politics is simple. Psychopolitics is complicated. First, it's a confrontation and a competition between traumas. The Palestinian friend of mine is coming to me and say, Avram, you know, when you established your state of Israel in 48, you created our tragedy, the Nakba. We were really traumatized by you. And I tell him, this is a trauma? Wait till you see mine. Mine is bigger. I had the Holocaust. And all of a sudden it's a competition of traumas rather than recognition and acceptance and containment of the other's sorrows. It's the rejection of it. And when you reject it and you do not accept it, you actually do not allow neither you nor him to get engaged in a deeper conversation about the future of both nations. Then there is something else about the psyche of the place, and this is a question of belonging. I don't really know how to define belonging. There are places in which I feel I belong. There are places in which I feel I'm not really belong. For example, here I feel I belong. At the Labour Party in Israel, not anymore. Why? Because of this reason or another, okay? But, I mean, I know it when I see it. I feel it when I feel it. Israel actually never had a serious, profound, deep discussion about its strategy towards the Middle East. Now, strategically speaking, we have two options. The first one is a very simple crusade one. Let's come as an alien foreign element to the region. Let's create the highest, thickest walls around us. And whomever gets too close to the walls, we shoot them down. That's one concept. We know how it works. It worked for the Chinese with the wall. It works for the Romans with their wars versus the barbarian. It works all over. Maybe even in Texas it works. I don't know. I read something about it. I don't know. Or it doesn't work. Okay? But that's one concept. The second one, and in this we invested a lot of means in order to make sure that nobody gets too close to our walls. The one we never investigated is, do we or can we think about integrating in the region? What are the prices of getting part of the region? I put it in a kind of a rhetorical question. And I think that the challenge of my generation is, or maybe the generation of my children is, when conflicts look as if they are less and less in numbers and intensity than they used to be all during the years. Just to give you numbers. We were educated in our educational system that in 1948 there were 7 Arab armies fighting against us in the war in independence. 1967, 19 years later, only 3 out of the 7 were engaged in real hostility: Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. Ever since, with Egypt we have peace, with Jordan we have peace, and Syria is whatever it is. So you say to yourself, listen, in 70 years, from 7 to 1.5, not bad. Not bad. I mean, it's a process. It goes somewhere. And still, let's imagine that one day, miraculously, a peace will be declared. Deus ex machina, peace will come down. And then my generation will have to ask itself the same question as my generation is asking itself all over the free West. Can the Jewish people survive without an external enemy? Give me a war, give me disaster, give me a program, I know what to do. I have a toolbox, I open it up, I run away, I know what to do. Give me peace, give me tranquility, give me equality, give me emancipation, give me integration, and I'm lost. So deep inside the question of why didn't we deliberate over the issue of integration in the region, there is a psychological reasoning which says, because if we shall integrate, maybe we're ill-equipped to preserve our identity. The same issue, almost as a mirror image, is being asked about the regional Arabic strategy. What do they do with us, such an element which is neither Muslim nor Arabic, in the region? How you contain it? How you engage yourself with it? Do you reject it? Do you try to annihilate it? Do you talk with it? Do you open yourself up towards it? Does it threat you? How so? Why? Can it be complementary with E? How so? How? Actually, this question hardly ever asked by Arabic intellectuals, strategists, or leaders. And when you take this, you realize that the conflict maybe is bigger than the political elements only. Now, we are living now in a very interesting moment. All the old structures are being actually smashed. Everything we know about the regional order actually collapses in front of our eyes. We don't really know what will reemerge, what will resurface, but something new is happening. New frames, new alignments, new contracts, a new political dialoguing? Whatever, is that a word? Here it became a word, okay? New political dialogic elements and energies are being born all over the place. We don't yet know the size of it. We don't yet know the potential of it. But it's all over the place. And you have a feeling that for the first time after so many years, the civil society of so many places around us and within us takes over. So this is a moment of potential in which I say, is it possible that the iconic conflict for so many problems we just mentioned can become, through this very rare moment in history, an iconic solution? Is it possible? Now, I'm an optimist. I'm a utopian, which means I'm a pinko, no good Nick, always believes in good, and I'm all this kind of left-wing no good Nickism, okay? So of course I believe that something good will come of it. We used to ask my mom, Mom, what are you? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? She said, me? Of course I'm an optimist. Today is much better than tomorrow. No, I'm not. I don't have this kind of optimism. I'm a real one, okay? I really believe that the world, with all the difficulties and with all the setbacks, is moving to the right direction. More democracy, more civil rights, more openness, more and more and more and more. And even in places within the Jewish society and other society in which I see the rising of fundamentalism, I'm happy because they react to me. It means that my progressive approach is touching them too painfully, so they have to react. So even fundamentalism is a promising wind for me. I hate it. Okay? So when I look at it and I say, what's the potential? When I was first invited, I read, what is this Weatherhead place? I mean, I know Featherhead, but Weatherhead, it's what is it? So I read a beautiful quotation written by Robert Bowie and Henry Kissinger, which actually in 1958 devised the concept, right? The strategy of the place. And it goes like this. Nowhere out there, nowhere do traditional attitudes fit the new realities, 58. Thus, notions of sovereignty and independence need revision to apply to a world where a nation level of life or survival may depend as much on actions of other countries as on its own. That's the first and only thing so far I ever agreed with Henry Kissinger. So, I mean, it must be a very universal truth, okay? And I asked myself, what is this interdependency or the potential for new dependency in the region? I won't go now into the readings that all of you read in the papers, how all of the sudden Saudi Arabia and Israel, the Wahhabis and the Jews, are lobbying Washington against Iran. Ooh, what's going on here exactly? Okay, how interest and interdependent, I can give you, and how Bibi Netanyahu is asking Obama to keep supporting the current regime in Egypt. What is it? This is actually what they said of other, depends as much on the actions of other countries as on its own. This is kind of new coalitions, new relations, new something is happening. And I would like to go about this new something. I believe the time is ripe for a joint effort in the region to develop a regional containing strategy. If I said earlier in my analysis that we never asked ourselves, do we want to be contained in the region, i.e. to integrate with the region, and I blamed or accused the Arab side never to ask, is there a place for an element like this, the State of Israel and the Jews in the region? I say now there is a readiness, there is an openness to speak about this mutual containment. Now, this mutual containment requires two basic building blocks. The first one is lingual, a new lexicon. I'm here with an individual who is dear to me and is my boss. This is Gertrude. She is the Director General of the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogues in Vienna. She is my boss. I'm her international coordinator. We happen to be here at the same time, but last week we've been to Brussels. We developed in the last 3 years in the Bruno Kreisky with a group of Israelis and a group of Palestinians a very simple piece of paper, which is called Principles for Alternatives to Partition. Everything in the Middle East is based on partition. Two states, but separated with a wall. Everything is divided. Can we think about sharing rather than dividing? So we developed it, and last week we introduced it to a large, huge forum of all the progressive factions in Brussels, actually towards an effort for this to be adopted as a neo-European policy to the Middle East. One of the guests there was the Secretary General of the Labour Party in Israel. He said, I'm a dove, I'm a peacenik, he is the head of the caucus for the two-state solution. I mean, he has all the right ingredients. Then he opened his mouth, and maybe I was the only one who didn't run away from the room. At the sense that the language to the Palestinians was, we give you, we tell you, we allow you, which was a kind of a master-to-subject conversation, which is, oh, I'm so generous, I'm ready for a solution. But this is not a conversation of peace. This is a conversation of an arrangement. This is the old political conversation of balance of interests, and I do not think the Middle East now is about interests. I think the Middle East now is at the junction of a new lexicon, and maybe we shall miss it, but the potential is there, of principles and values first, and only then the political arrangements. And therefore the conversation should be what is right and what is wrong, rather than what is good for me and what is bad for you. How does it work? We say a lot, and Jeff and we contemplated earlier, 2 states, 1 state, 5 states. I mean, the longer you stay, it's like an amoeba, okay? The longer you stay, it divides and divides and divides. But this is institutional thing. This is not a real, this is just a structural thing. It's not a content. So when you say today 2-state solution, it sounds like something is missing from the book. In what sense? When we started with this formula 30 years ago, the feeling was that only was it accepted at the time of the 70s and the early 80s and even later, even during Oslo, it would have been the final arrangement. This can arrange it all. When you say today 2-state solution, everybody understands. There will be so many things left behind so that an interim, so a 2-state solution is at the best an interim one. And now the question is, interim towards what? What next? And this interim towards what is an invitation, it's not just a threat. So I would like to offer here a structure which is based out, which is built on the principles we developed out there, and we hope in the next couple of years with a couple of international and regional partners to develop into a more comprehensive approach or policy. And I will call it the 3 floors house, or the 3 floors home. How does it go? The ground floor, which is a necessity, says as follows: every individual between the Jordan and the Mediterranean has the right to have the same rights. The discourse of rights, which is actually the basic foundation of any democratic conversation, is totally missing from the conversation. Leave aside the problems we as a Jewish segment within the Israeli society are having with our personal status, marriages, etc., with the chief rabbinate and other Catholic Jewish institutions. Okay, we shall discuss it some other time. But the fact that Israel argues so eloquently, and everybody loves it and repeats it time and again, especially here in America, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, it's a beautiful, almost perfect argument. I will correct it slightly. Israel is the only half democracy in the Middle East. Okay, I mean, it's almost the same. Something is missing. What is missing? It's impossible. Impossible. Logically and morally and intellectually, to accept a reality as a democratic, comprehensive democratic one when it denies the rights of individuals and collective for self-determination, which is a basic birthright of any democratic animal. And this is what we do for the last 5 decades, whether we like it or not, but it is there. You cannot ignore it, you cannot deny it, it is there. And therefore the ground floor should not be about the arrangement first, but about securing the rights of every individual to have the same rights, the same access for resources, the same rights for security, the same rights for liberties, the same rights for everything. Once this is established, we need a mezzanine floor. The mezzanine floor is a very structural one. This is where you express, or this is where we exercise the two states solution. Actually, two entities, political independent entities, that one contains and solves and expresses the needs and motivations of the Jewish collective, and the one does the needs and motivations of the Palestinian one. But this is not enough, because at the proximity of 200 meters away from each other's window, it's impossible to have two conflictual systems like this without a kind of a supra-coordination. Impossible. And I'll just give you 3 illustrations to the impossibility. It's impossible to live in the same courtyard, so to say, in a situation in which, for you, one individual is a freedom fighter, and for me, he's the master of atrocities, or the other way around. We need a kind of a moral, legal system in which a crime is a crime and righteousness is righteousness, but not both at the same place. We need a kind of environmental infrastructure in which we don't have rivers, so let's say creeks. Shimon Peres once said that the Jordan River is a river that has more history than water. Okay, so, and this is our river, so imagine the rest of them which are not even rivers, okay? But our environment, it's impossible that somebody who lives on the top of the mountain, be it a settler or be it somebody in Nablus, who take a leak and I drink it in Netanya. Which means you need a kind of environmental coordination which is atop of the two separate political entities. It's a coordinating one. And the last but not least is about economy. Here we have one economy, the Israeli one, which the average annual GDP per capita is something like $30,000. And we have another one which again is 200 meters from our window, is at best $1,300, $1,500, $1,600 GDP, annual GDP per capita. The gap is too much. What do you do in order to balance it in such a way that both entities will be able to live together? For this, you need a suprastructure. That's the third floor. Be it a federation or co-federation or whatever you call it, or a union, I don't really care. But it's impossible without it. So it is not anymore my state confines itself versus the region, and your state behind the other side of the wall conflictual with mine, but it is one ground floor of the same value system, two states which are living next to each other with seamless openness as possible, and one suprastructure atop of it to coordinate all effort. Once this union, treaty, federation is in place, others can join. Just imagine if you tell me, Avram, it's impossible. Think about Europe of 75 years ago. Think about Europe of 1,000 years ago. The continent of bloodshed. Everybody killed everybody else. And in return, everybody else killed everybody else. For thousands of years. Only did I tell you 75 years ago that France and Germany will coordinate their economic efforts vis-a-vis Europe, you would have said no go. No go. Italy and the rest, Italy still doesn't go, okay? Okay, I mean, just think about all of these places that all of a sudden, they live in such a reality that were I not a cynical, my old cynical self, I would have said they're living in a biblical prophecy almost. Who would have believed such a reality? Now, if it happened between Germany and France, well, it might happen between us as well. Having said that, I would like to end up. My ending up would have shocked my mom. But everything is coming from her, as I will explain in a second. Because at the day in which my children will want and will be able to marry the children of my Palestinian enemies, I will know that my identity is being threatened. But the iconic conflict was replaced by an iconic solution. Why do I say it's all coming from my mom? My mother was born in Hebron. Not a nice place nowadays, well, even less nicer when she was born. And she lost her mother when she was 6. At the age of 8, the massacre of 29 in Hebron happened. Dozens of Jews were slaughtered in 29 in Hebron, in August 29 in Hebron. Half of my mother's family was uncles and aunts and nephews and cousins were massacred. And my mother was saved. My grandfather was the chief rabbi of Hebron at the time, the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Hebron, so to say. And they rented an apartment from a local landlord. At his old age, he went to Turkey and he brought a new wife, and she gave him 2 sons, Shakir and Yasser. And one night, Shakir was very sick and ill, and the doctors said he will never survive the evening, will never survive the night. My grandfather, the rabbi, was sitting next to his bed and was praying and reading Psalms, and for the first time since the Sinai revelation, God listened to a rabbi. I mean, a miracle happened, and God listened to a rabbi, and in the morning the kid was okay. Both of them, Shakir and Abu Shakir, never forgot it. When the mobsters started to chant in the streets of Hebron in this Shabbat, Etbah el Yahud, slaughter the Jews, slaughter the Jews, slaughter the Jews, she, Shakir, sent this eldest son of hers to the vineyard. It was the high season, and all the farmers were living outside in the fields, and said, bring the old man back home. The Jews of the street were divided into 2 houses, one of my uncles and one into the rabbi's one. They said my uncle was a young, prominent person, accepted by the British authorities, and the Palestinians respected him. Nothing of evil would happen to us out there. And the others would say, let's go to the rabbi, God will help us. Everybody who went to my uncle's place was slaughtered. Then came Abu Shakir, stood at the door gate, and he physically, as a righteous among the nations, saved my mom, saved my grandfather, saved all of our family. They amputated his leg. They wounded him. He never moved. Ever since, my family is equally divided. 50% of my family are the most extreme right-wing radicals. Never trust anybody from the other side. It's us for our own, and let's shoot all the rest of them. And my family, my kids and my sisters and others, will ever look at the other side and say, who is the individual with whom we can restart it all? Now, this is not an easy task, because actually it has a kind of a Hannah Arendt argument which says, I do not believe in automatic goodness of a collective. It is not anymore all of us versus all of them. It is some of us and some of them who are ready to sacrifice a lot in order to live better, versus some of us and some of them who are ready to sacrifice each other. I believe the day is very close for our alternative to take over. after 120 years of this kind of a bloody conflict, it's about time to try the alternative. And I believe that's the model. Thank you very much. One at a time, please. Yeah. Your name, please.
I'm Danny Olga from the History Department. And thanks for a very interesting speech. And your speech
Go straight to the however. Save it, yeah.
No, I said your speech was so optimistic, I would counter with a little dose of pessimism. Wait for the mic for them. Oh, sorry. I'd counter with a little dose of pessimism, if I may. The solution you offer, a kind of either a confederacy or a federation, I wouldn't go too far. I'd look at other countries in the Middle East. And when I look at countries with all sorts of complicated arrangements between ethnic groups, Lebanon comes into mind first, Iraq is a kind of a federation, and the record of his solutions is not splendid at all. And I ask myself, in such a turbulent period in the Middle East, us and the Palestinians with such a long history of hatred and bloodshed, if it doesn't work anywhere in the Middle East, would it work in our case?
Actually, I'm not at all sure that your approach is a pessimistic one. Okay, I can give you some real pessimistic ones, okay? Like, let's nuke them all. Do you hear about it recently? Okay, that's a good one. Okay, I can give you some more. Let's invade them all, let's conquer them all, etc. When I want to read, against my lingual recommendation earlier, the Israeli motivation, I will say it's not good for us to continue the way it is today. Now, since I do not believe that peace is about what's good for me, but what is right and what is wrong, as I said, so it's not about treating what is good for me and what is not. The question is how you change the course of history. And is it possible to change the course of history? Now, I take it that as a historian, you know that this is a deliberation never resolved, and is it the role of the individual, or is the individual actually the implementer of the circumstances, etc.? You know it better than I do, because you're in Harvard and I'm just a hillbilly from Jerusalem, okay? What do I know? But nonetheless, I do believe in the role of ideas, and the role of values, and the role of leaderships. I do believe. I'll give you one example, which is a very bad one, but it serves me, so I will use it, okay? I have issues, I mean, as if somebody listens to me. I have an issue with Obama. Such a disappointment. I mean, at every given moment, I prefer him to any kind of Republican alternatives if anybody asks me. Thank God nobody asks me, okay? But his policy in the Middle East is confusing to say the least. But here is a moment. Obama comes to Cairo. His speech in Cairo is an historic moment. It's not just a political moment. This is the first time, maybe after a couple of hundreds of years, that somebody from the Christian hemisphere speaks freely, openly, eye level, with an open audience, actually the entire Muslim, Arab, and Muslim world. This is a conversation of one individual representing iconically so many layers and baggages behind him that started by the end of the day the revolution in Egypt and in the Middle East, the Arab awakening. That's a moment in history. This is a place in which an idea or moral approach impacted reality. I'll give you another one. Oslo at the time was what a surprise. Out of nowhere. Now, seriously, Deus ex machina, Oslo came down. Now, here you have two political entities, 100% of Israelis versus 100% of the Palestinians, in the first intifada, total collision, everybody against everybody else, total hatred, absolute animosity, and overnight, 75% of both population adopted the alternative approach. Why is that? Because people many times are more ripe and more accurate and more sensitive than their frightful leaderships. I believe, and this is what the reading I try to offer, that both the people at the masses level and the reality and the context of it is ready for new thinking. How will it be introduced? Who will do the delivery? Who will support it? Who will join? I don't yet know. But the time is ripe. It is ripe because I believe that the majority of the Israelis and the majority of the Palestinians, as for now, know for sure that the current state of affairs goes to hell. So actually anything and anybody who is ready to offer a U-turn from the highway to hell should be seriously considered. So I offer a reading. Now, is this reading something that will come overnight? The answer is no. Does it require a lot of support and a lot of help? The answer is yes. Do we have potential partners for it? The answer is yes. And I'll give you just two for a second, okay? The first is, what about Europe? I don't know if you know, and I don't know if you realize, but a day will come in which you will be professor in Harvard for history, and you will say at the year 2013, this was the year in which United States of America walked away from the Middle East. America is moving away from the Middle East. Once America will gain its energetic independence, it will not, for years to come, mess up again with anything which is Muslim. Enough is enough. Or as we used to say at home, genug is genug. Enough is enough, okay? And America is walking away. And all of a sudden, the wings of Europe are exposed. This is why Europe plays a different role. What do you think, that the Israelis would have come to Kerry's table without the Europeans saying, hey, we're going to make a distinction between legitimate Israel and the non-legitimate settlements? And all of a sudden, Europe played a power play. Europe has an interest, and Europe has an interest that the European values will be wider than the European continent. Turkey, as strange as Turkey is, it looks like they have a strategy. We don't really know what is it, but part of it has to do with a lot of economy. Turkey declared that it wants to be, within 20 years, to be one of the 10 largest economies in the world. Let's say it will take them 40 years and it will be the 15 largest economies in the world. For this kind of economy, you need open borders, political stability, modernity, etc., 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 free move of commodities and manpower. This calls for a different interference in the region. So we have Erdogan is a little bit of a meshuggah, okay? And it's not that we are all sane, okay? I mean, we have a new foreign minister. We have our own issues, okay? Okay, but nonetheless, okay? The strategy of Turkey is a very interesting potential. And I can go on and on and on and on to tell you that there are new voices that we should not ignore. Maybe that we will be disappointed by the end of the day, but let's explore them. Let's see what's going on there. Jeff is the Nancy.
תודה רבה.
Slow down.
לאט, yeah.
Yeah, לאט, exactly.
So I think it's interesting that
I told you, slow down.
I'm trying. That Fukuyama and Huntington are often put head-to-head against each other. I think that, well, partially they did intend to be academic rivals, but I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, right? Because Fukuyama is often conflated, and what he was really saying that, in good faith, the world will eventually turn towards universal democracy. What Huntington was saying was that conflict will turn towards, racial or religious persuasions, right? But I think what can happen in Israel is that while the conflict is right now over racial or religious persuasion, eventually Israel could turn to becoming a secular democracy. The reason being that a secular state allows still for religious people, whereas a religious state doesn't allow for secular for a secular existence. So my question is, why would it not just be better to have eventually, I mean, I'm saying like in the far future, a one-state solution, right? Because the problem with the two-state solution is right now, Israel has so expanded into Palestinian territories.
I mean, one within Israel for religious and non-religious together,
Well, my question,
instead of two Israels.
well,
Okay, go
I mean,
on.
but the question is, where would you put the borders, right? And if you eventually have a one-state solution where the people learn to coexist, the question of where the borders are would be a non-issue. Yeah.
Here are the two Israeli individuals walking towards each other in the streets of Tel Aviv. And one is holding two gigantic watermelons under his armpits. And the other one is asking him, excuse me, do you know where's Bialik Street? So he said, will you hold the watermelons for a second? So he takes the watermelons and he says, I don't know. So actually what I want to ask you is, will you hold the two watermelons, the Israeli and Palestinians, for a while? I want just to exercise. I don't know. What do I mean when I say I do not know? You ask me to try to penetrate into the far future. Even though that the notion of one state is not something which I immediately object or reject or whatever, I take it there will be a needed period of cooling off or cooling down for the two sides to let's regroup alone and see what happens to overcome it. Should be a very constructed and bridging and etc. between the two, but nonetheless, when I say I don't know, I have two reservations which I have no clue how to walk around them. Israel, and by the end of the day it will be Palestine as well, because there will be a state of Palestine. Israel is one of the most rigid states around the world. Still very old Central European 18th, 19th century nation state in the world. Almost, I would say, nation ethnical state in the world. So far, so much so that we even have an ethnical democracy. If it's possible, if it's not an oxymoron. Now, the future of the nation state is not clear to me. I see a very intensive erosion of the notion of the state, and I see a very serious erosion at the notion of the nation. I see it in the West for sure, and in some other places as well. So I ask myself, in a world in which the nation is not clear to me, and the state is not clear to me anymore, can I predict a one state, a two states? I don't know. I'll give you an example. I mean, I visited the headquarters of Google just the other day in Tel Aviv. And I asked myself, I spoke to the people, and I had a feeling that they are Google's patriots. And actually, Google is, in a way, is there a cultural political entity for them? They communicate with Google eyes like them all over the world before they communicate with me. The taxes the income that they do and the taxes that they are supposed to pay does not necessarily go to my country or to my state, but goes to some, I don't know where Google pays taxes, if at all. Where Apple does, okay? Okay, to the same place. So the expressions of belonging again with the multinational economy and the multinational cultures and all over, I don't know where is it. So today, when Nancy's separation is so needed between the two nations as is, to predict the state structure, it's too premature for me. Do I stand against the notion? The answer is no. I'm ready to explore it. But it will take a while.
Last week I was
Your name, please?
David Rush. I'm
David,
a retired professor at Tufts. I was in Israel, and I met with Molad and Michael Mannequin, and I met with Danny Seidemann from Terrestrial Jerusalem. And Danny Seidemann said, if it doesn't happen now, it will never happen. The door is closing. And Michael Mannequin said, never say never. It may be a long, slow process, and we don't know where it's going to go, and it can always be solved. I wonder if you would comment.
You know, the Never Never Land is not a one I was ever a citizen of. It looks like we have an opportunity now. It looks like we're going to miss the opportunity. But it doesn't mean that there will not be other opportunities in the future. You don't really know. I'll give you, again, an anecdote with your permission. I was drafted to the army in the autumn of '73. I find myself by the end of the Yom Kippur War at the other side of the Suez Canal as a young rookie, young trainee. The other side of the Suez Canal, in the middle of the Sinai, beautiful night, deep into my foxhole that I had to dig. And I was sitting there shivering from fear. And I had a little transistor. You know what's transistor? This is what iPod was before it became an iPod, okay? So, and I was listening to my transistor, and I heard the hoarse voice of President Sadat saying that he's ready to sacrifice 1.5 million Egyptian soldiers in order to redeem the Holy Land of Sinai. And I said, holy gosh, 1.5 million Egyptian soldiers against Avraham Burgi, a Shiva boy from Jerusalem? What did I do wrong? I was 18 years old boy. I was frightened to death. I can't even illustrate the depths of fear. This was late '73, early '74. Here we are, November '77. 4 years later, Sadat comes to Jerusalem, and I'm now a released young paratrooper officer running after his convoy and chants like, no more war, no more bloodshed. 4 years' time. All the windows were closed, blocked, cemented. All of a sudden they were open. Then they were closed again. The effort should be done by people like the people you met in Molad and Danny Zeidman and myself and others is to keep them open when the opportunity is there and to reopen them when somebody else closes them, but never to give up hope. He's the master. I'm an innocent bystander. Your name, please?
Hi, I'm Eileen Babbitt. I'm a professor at the Fletcher School at Tufts. And my question is about the psychopolitics. You kind of skipped over that. So you gave this lovely vision, which is terrific, that's based on principles and values and structures, et cetera. But what about those psychopolitics that you mentioned? And I'm thinking about the fears of the Israelis and the Jews and the anger and the humiliation of the Palestinians. Where does that get handled or taken care of on the way to this vision?
Many years ago, I was the chairman of the World Zionist Organization. I was the chief Zionist, okay? And one day, I was thinking, something doesn't really happen to you when you're a Zionist, but I was thinking, okay? And did I say something wrong? Okay. And I was thinking, and I asked myself, imagine that you are now in Vienna by the end of the 19th century, and a Jewish doctor, Dr. Herzl, would have crossed the street and knock on the door of another Jewish doctor, Dr. Freud, and say, Doctor, I have a dream. Well, I take it that he would have said, would you lie down there and take all the bullshit out of his head, okay? Psychopolitics is something very intensive all over the place. I mean, not just here. I mean, I remember when Obama was elected and I was browsing all of these intellectual blogs, etc., and so many of them said, wow, now slavery is over. And I said, only now? This is also psychopolitics, and I can go for so many expressions of it. When I first tried to lock horns with psychopolitics, It was when I wrote my book about the Holocaust. It was a very difficult book to write. I mean, forget about read. Writing was very difficult. I think I deleted 800 pages in order to publish 400. And every day was a torture. But within it, in which I argue with the Israeli strategy using the Holocaust or using the trauma as a national strategy, I argued that it's about time to think about trust as a national strategy rather than as trauma as a national strategy. Now, as we spoke earlier, it is not something that happens overnight. But what did I have in mind? One day in our lifetime, or at least for sure in our children's lifetime, the last Holocaust survivor will pass away, and the last Nazi victimizer will die. One day we shall wake up, and the Holocaust will not be anymore a personal experience, but a memory. And I try in this book, among other things, to conceptualize the strategy of the future memory. And I believe that a lot, with at least the Israeli, I'm not eligible to speak about the Palestinian side, though tomorrow at the seminar we'll try to do it. Okay? Tomorrow I will be eligible. Today I'm not, okay? I feel that if the departure point towards a less traumatic psychopolitics is addressing the issue of the Holocaust. Now, I do not want to say how to address, but first to address. And the first addressing is less cynical exploitation of it. And the second address is less hysteria. Give you an example. We have an issue with Iran. It's an issue. It's not just, an occurrence. It is something very serious. But then comes my prime minister and says, you know what? It's 38 all over again. Immediately, everybody understands what does that mean. That in 4 years' time, we're at the Wannsee room in order to decide about the final solution. And I say, is it 38? Did we have 200 denied bombs in 38? Did we have the most powerful, mighty air force in the world in 38? Did we have sovereignty in 38? Did we have the unequivocal support of all the important superpowers of the world in 38? Did we have the Vatican to change its dogma vis-a-vis the Jews through the Nostra Aetate in 38? And therefore new dogmatic relations with the Christian world? No, we didn't have it all in 38. So it's not 38. And when you compare it to 38, and especially Ahmadinejad to Hitler, don't you make life a bit too cheap for Mr. Hitler? So part of the departure from, and it's a departure, it's not yet arrival, but departure towards a new psychopolitics, less trauma-driven and more trust-driven, is addressing the issue of the Holocaust. Your name, please?
My name is Zinovi. Zinovi Beyman. You were saying about the right language, and you were talking about a new lexicon. You gave us example. We tell you like not a good thing to do. You wanted to leave the room. I was on the verge of leaving the room when you said, describing the Hebron massacre, you said that in Hebron you found Palestinians, and these Palestinians, I make a conjecture, were only Arab-speaking people, maybe Muslim-speaking people. But I would argue that your relatives, which were your ancestors who lived in 1929 in Hebron, were Palestinians too. By twisting the language, you are dealing with the new conflict, you have to not only ask other people watch their tongue, but we have together with you watch our tongues, and we have to say that the whole Palestine is not from Gaza to the River Jordan, but across the River Jordan, and the whole Palestinian Kingdom of Jordan and Palestinian Republic of Gaza, which is now kind of independent state as well, already exist two Palestinian Arab entities. And we have a third Palestinian Arab entity, which is kind of under auspices of, let's say, Israeli government. But we can argue also that Jews are allowed, Jews are under the system of apartheid in Palestine. And when I say Palestine, I include Tel Aviv and Haifa in Palestine too, because Jews are allowed only 15% of Palestine. They can push their carriages only on 15% of Palestine. The moment they move their baby carriages out of this line, I read about you that you never crossed the green line, but there are many lines in the land of Palestine, including Israel. They are tossed. They can be killed. They can be harmed. Please comment on my statement.
You don't have to ask me to comment. I'll do it anyway. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that if both of us would have walked out of the room and try at the corridor when these people still discuss among themselves all the good things they usually do in Harvard, okay? We discuss among ourselves Israeli politics, we would have found ourselves in the two opposite poles of the Israeli politics. Am I right? Conceptually speaking, yeah, potentially speaking. Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay, so just to make sure what we're talking about, you spoke about many things, okay? Many things. And you had a very augmented argument. So let's begin with the first one. My mother, unlike some other friends of mine who the families are either from Hebron or from the old Jewish segment of Israel prior to the rise of Zionism, my mother did not see herself as a Palestinian Jew. She did not. They came here some 250 years ago as part of the new wave of redemptive way of Jews coming for the redemption, and did not see themselves as any part as part of the Palestinian or part of the Jewish Arabs, as much as my mother said that she had an Arab wet nurse, which in an Arabic tradition is something very interesting because it's as close to adoption as possible, so to say. But she did not see herself. I have some other friends like Yuda Shenhav and others, and Eli Amir and others, who see themselves as an Arab Jews. Like you have Arab Christians and Arab Muslims, they were Arab Jews. My mother did not. And she was saved by a local Palestinian, a local Hebronite. If this insults you to the level in which you have to walk out of the room, I really want to urge you to stay in the room. Don't run away so fast, okay? Because I want to argue with you. I do not even want to argue about the issue of who has what percentage of the land, because for me territory is not that important. We are living in a very unique generation in which we redefined Jewish nationalism or Jewish national definition with concepts that were never used in Jewish history before. We, those who live in Israel, we live in a reality in which the territory, the sovereignty, the power, the geography, the language, and the religion are all together in the same place. So the definition of Israeli nationalism is the 5 components together: language and territory and sovereignty and power and religion. Never in our history did we have all the components together. There were times in which we had sovereignty, but the language was Aramaic. There was times in which we spoke Hebrew, but the territory was not the same, etc., etc., etc. So for me, to be a Jew, or even to be an Israeli, the land is nice to have, but not a necessity. Not all of it. Now, I would like to offer you the falafel dilemma. Those of you who've been recently to Israel, you know that there was a paradigmatic change in the falafel concept of Israel. And I must share it with you. When I was a little boy, the paradigm of falafel was as follows. You came to the falafel man, the falafel man, okay? You gave him 5 shekels, and he gave you a pita falafel with some balls, some salad, some tahina, and that's it, done deal. No argument. Today, it's the Milton Friedman of the falafelism, so it's a salad bar open for all. He gives you a pita falafel, and you can put everything you want inside. Now, I'm a Jerusalemite, I'm an Israeli, I'm not a sucker. If it is for free, the pita is that small, but I put a heap of salads like this, and then a tahina, and then balls, never mind that half of it is on the floor. It's for free. Now, what is the dilemma here? Every Israeli would like to have in his small pita falafel every possible ball on the salad bar. We want the greatest land of Israel, not the greater land of Israel, the greatest one, from the Euphrates to the Nile. Promise, the widest, there are 5, 7 borders in the Bible. We want the largest one. We want the most comprehensive, profound, detailed democracy. And we want to keep the Jewish character of the place. Now, it's impossible, ladies and gentlemen. The pita is too small. If you want the greater land of Israel, you either give up the Jewish character of the place or democracy. You want full democracy, you either give up the greater land of Israel or the Jewish character of the place, etc., etc., etc. Now, I don't know what is your diet, sir. Don't try to overeat your falafel. And the strategic decision in front of each and every Israeli leader, ever since, is which falafel bowl you give up. Now, all of them, right-wingers included, Menachem Begin in Camp David and the autonomy for the Israeli Arabs, Shamir in Madrid, Netanyahu all over the place, rhetorically speaking. Arik Sharon, Ehud Olmert, Yitzhak Rabin, all of them right-wingers. When it came to the decision, all of them gave up territory. But you? So maybe there is a logic there. Thank you.
I'm Subrata Ghoshroy. I'm a researcher at Science, Technology, and Society at MIT. And I have heard that you are in the process of organizing a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East Conference in Israel. If that's correct, can you maybe say a few things about it?
Yeah, there will be next month a conference in Haifa, which is going to explore this notion of free Middle East from mass destruction weapons. Officially, I don't think Israel has nuclear power. I denied it so many times myself, so it doesn't exist, okay? So, assuming I was wrong or deceiving, the nuclear power of Israel, not a nuclear power for peace purposes or for energy purposes or research purposes, but for military purposes, was no doubt an asset for so many years. The 50s and the 60s, especially during the 73 war, and maybe a few other cases as well. Here is a moment in history, apropos new lexicon and apropos new realities and new circumstances, in which an asset is becoming a liability. It is almost impossible, logically speaking, to demand a certain set of demands. Now from Iran, and later maybe from Saudi Arabia, who will not maybe develop it, but will buy it if it did not already buy it, and Egypt who will look into it, etc., that you do not apply on yourself. And this will be part of international treaties and monitoring, etc., etc., etc. And there is a limit to how much you can extend the world patience and maybe even our own patience. Now, a nuclear Middle East is a problem. It's a problem for the world and it's a problem for Israel. And I do not see how we can disarm the Middle East from weapons of mass destruction without Israel being part of the process as well. Now, I believe, as much as I believe that security is not about arms and security is not about weapons, but security is about something else, it's about well-being and it's about so many other things, that even without the nuclear power, the military and security cutting edge that Israel has in the region is sufficient and enough, at least for the next 5 wars. The 6th one I have no idea, but the 5th, the next 5 for sure.
Thank you. My name is Salma Abu Ayyash. I'm Palestinian from Bet Umar, outside of Khalil. Hebron. I would talk to you any day compared to other people. And
You're what?
I would talk to you any day compared to other people I've heard in this institution. No. So what I'm about to say might sound a little aggressive, but I'm not really trying to. I'm just being honest about how I'm reacting to your talk. I mean, you've said things that are very interesting for me, confronting your Jewish identity, this idea of Jews not being the victims anymore and constantly trying to defend themselves, etc. Israel has the 4th largest army in the world. We see what they do on a daily basis. So there's a lot that's loaded there, and I admire any Jewish person, any Israeli person who's looking inwards and looking at that identity issue, and post the Holocaust, post everything that you've talked about. So this is very optimistic for me. However, you framed the problem in a way that I think is somewhat problematic for me when you started talking about Judeo-Christian alliance or similarities versus the Muslim world. Unless what you mean by that is some kind of a Judeo-Christian colonial project that you two relate to versus the people who are being colonized. I mean, and incidentally, Obama did not start the revolution in Egypt, and his speech there about Islam is all bogus given what we see, what he does in this country to Muslims and how and everything that's happened after his speech. So I'm wondering, for somebody like you who's instilled some hope in me, if you would confront your identity as a colonial settler in this land. Your mother is an Ashkenazi European. There are Palestinian Jews that have always belonged to that piece of land, and they've always been welcomed, and there was no difference between, anybody who tells you anything else is a liar, because the problems between Jewish, Christians and Muslims in that piece of land started when white Europeans came to that piece of land. Whether they were peaceful, whether they were, whatever they were Europeans. And if the Judeo-Christian theory that you started with to frame this thing is a hint towards what a colonial project looks like, I welcome that. I was just wondering if you could, because you talked about trust, and you talked about moving forward and building a house. And if the house is built on broken foundations, it's going to fall apart. And I, as a Palestinian, have at some point in my life thought that I needed to study the Holocaust history and education in Jordan, where I grew up. I didn't learn any history. So I've picked up books and I've learned about the Holocaust, and I found I had nothing to do with it. It's something that I have to learn because I'm dealing with people who've suffered the Holocaust. So it's not an equal suffering because I did not cause that suffering on you. So I'll stop right there. I think there's enough in there for you to unravel. Thank you.
First, I'm very happy that you're ready to talk to me. You know, you're one of the few, because many Israelis do not anymore. So, okay. No, but first to explain what I said that the Judeo-Christian, that was the argument of the Huntingtons, etc. I do not really buy it. Okay, I'm not into it, but this is how the world was divided since the late 80s and on. At a group we were sitting together in Vienna, which I told you about it earlier, we came to one principle which is very, very interesting, and another one which is, and another process which is no less interesting. The first principle, let's find, where is it here? If I can find it somewhere here. I don't have it here. I sent it to somewhere, I sent it to Steve earlier on, but this says actually, if we want to solve previous wrongs, we cannot actually doing it by creating future wrongs. Mistakes were done. Was it done deliberately? I don't know. Do I want to argue and check any one of them? The answer is no. Do I have responsibility as an Israeli to the problem of the Palestinian refugee? The answer is yes. Can I resolve it today without creating new kind, inflicting new kind of traumas, etc.? Partly yes and partly no. So whatever solution which is possible without creating new wrongs and new rounds of problems is welcome by me. The rest of it, we have to talk about it, okay? And I have a full recognition for it, period. I mean, I will never accept it that people killing, I will never accept killing as a solution, and etc., etc. But once it happens, I would say I have my own responsibility. Other things could be done differently for the Palestinians by its own leadership? Yes, but it's not my business. Could it be treated differently in Lebanon, in Damascus, and in Jordan? The answer is yes, it's not my business. I mean, it's painful because, literally speaking, my best friends are coming from these kind of painful places. But my responsibility is, yes, when I was drowning in the ocean, right after 45, and whatever straw I found in the ocean, I just grabbed, it inflicted your Nakba. And therefore I'm part of it. Yeah, no, I'll come to the beyond in a second, okay? I'll come to the beyond in a second. So this is just about the moment of history at the time. Now, now that it is a reality, I do not argue where people came from. I will not go neither to the Palestinian history and say, okay, you came with Muhammad Ali, and you came from Hijaz, and you came from there. All of you go back home because you came at the same time that my mother came from Belarus, Russia. It's not about this. No, no. We're all there. Okay, we're all there. We're all here. Here it's easier, so to say. No, I don't want to open it. I'm not into the fingering, saying my finger, your finger, mine is bigger, yours is bigger. I'm not into this. As I said, it's a fact of life. I take it. I accept it. How do I build from here and on? There is one thing that I wonder. Not enough Israelis and not enough Jews within Israel and outside are getting seriously engaged and committed with the Arab question, the Arab, Muslim, regional, etc. Even less Arabs and even less Palestinians are getting committed and engaged to explore the Jewish question for the Arabs. Not the way we do here. So what we set it up in Vienna are two groups, parallel groups. One is an Arab Muslim one, which deals for 2 years now already, in a very intensive way, the Arab engagement with the Jewish question, and another one which is Jewish, which is parallel to this one, is the Jewish engagement with the Arab question, aiming to end the process by the 4th or the 5th year while sitting together and getting engaged with mutual questions. And through intellectual exploration, which leads to spiritual and cultural and political, to all of these places, eventually to offer an alternative platform to the mutually ignoring each other, actually towards containment and acceptance.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated your talk and the interchange and all your questions. I have a somewhat simple question.
Your name?
Lenore Martin. I'm at the Weatherhead Center, and we've actually had a few emails.
Thanks.
And I'm very happy you're here. The simple question is, I'm listening to you, and I'm really taken with what you're saying, and I'm thinking, how do we get to anywhere near what you're saying with the politics that are now that I now see?
Let's move to the next question, please.
I mean, I just don't, Avigdor Lieberman is welcome back, Netanyahu, I don't have to say any more. I'll leave my question as it is. How do you deal with that? How do you move forward with with your vision or something like it, or at this point?
I'll tell you what I do. Easy it is not. Okay, when you have this kind of positions, you overnight become the most popular pariah in the country. And I'm an expert on it, okay? At each and every book of mine, I become even a better pariah. I mean, I'm good. I'll tell you what is my reading, because the question is the question of impact and influence, not just ideas, how you take it from the drawing board into the real reality, right? In Israel, now, I know it's a global phenomenon all over the democratic realm, but in Israel for sure, all the content generators were turned off some 20-some years ago. Up until 30, 25, 20 years ago, in Israeli politics, you had three generators of content. The parties themselves, either ideological circles within parties, the conflict between parties. Just imagine Ben-Gurion and Begin, how many dialectic syntheses were born between the two of them. Then you had the media, which each and every ideological walk of life had the media coverage. And then you had the academia, which came in and came out and actually enriched the ideological, political content reality. All the three of them are dead. Politics do not produce any content anymore in Israel. The last idea ever introduced to the Israeli debate was Oslo. Ever since, you don't hear any idea. The media is between dying and being extinguished, and the academia simply took off. It's the first ivory-made satellite to take off to the stratosphere. Okay, that's ivory-made satellites. So there is no content producers in the country anymore. So the question for me is not necessarily how you take this and you make this politician to adopt it in order to go this way or that way. Is how to create, how to help politics and politicians to read things in content terms. Now think about American political landscape at the year 2000. Then at the time, you had a feeling that and I don't know what your people's affiliation is, none whatsoever, but at the time there was a feeling that it's Republicans forever. Right? So what happened here from the Democratic side, there was a reading saying, actually, we do not have enough institutions that will accept and absorb and later on will dissipate in or percolate into the system ideas and concepts. So in the last 10 years or so, the Democratic side of Israel, the progressive side of America, built institutions, be it think tanks and media watches and democratic awareness and civil society involvement and you name it. And all of a sudden the carriers are there. So part of what I try to do in Israel, and I do it through many, many vehicles, is actually to produce content generators. And if I'm being asked, what are you doing nowadays? Again, my mom, okay? My mom used to say, Avram, what will I say my girlfriends you are doing nowadays? It's never about what do you do. So one day she was very, very old, and she asked me, Avram, what will I do the Vibers you are doing nowadays? I told her, Mom, you're so old. All your friends already passed away. You can ask me straightforward. I will give you an answer. So what I do in the last 10 years, I produce content. Through institutions, through writing, through articles, through some provocations, not too many, but trying to establish it. And I believe that's the way.
My name is Henry Steiner. I had a question that may be a little more personal. It takes off from some others here. I read your The Holocaust is Over with the keenest absorption and pleasure and sense of your saying much better than I could so many things that I deeply believe in. But it raised certain real issues that have come up today. Of course it's raised issue. It's so provocative and deep a book. But I wondered what your conception of Jewish identity was, and the value, paramount, hegemonic, exclusive, zero, of its survival in what we call the state of Israel or in the world at large. Because your vision seems to me intensely humanistic and universalizing, taking us away from the particularities of our genes and birth and nature and context to what you might say is a foundation of the human rights movement, to a sense of equal human dignity, worth before God or before nature or however we believe. So I'm wondering how that ties in and whether a large part of the struggle in Israel is the belief that Jewish exclusivity, whatever the chosen people means, some degree of that left, some holding on to tradition and Talmud and ethics and Yiddish and God, the entire culture is an important part of the separation from others, which in fact a two-state solution might, and which the settlements paradigmatically, I think, represent. They're all Jewish in an alien land. So I wondered how you feel about these things and how important that theme of maintaining how you understand it, Jewish identity, affects your sense of Israel's desirable path.
First, I loved your compliments. I think it was Henry Kissinger who once was flattered with this kind of over-complimenting opening, and he said, only my parents were here. My father would have loved it, and my mother would even believe you. Okay, so since I was so many years in Israeli politics, let me try to circumvent your question, okay, and give you an answer for a different one. Okay, and maybe it will indirectly will answer it, okay? I'm living spiritually, I'm living with a kind of a phantom, how do you say phantom, when you amputate the phantom syndrome, phantom limb. What was amputated? I, for many years, traveled to North America. And during the American Jewry and others, I mean, the rest of the minorities here. Okay, we had the majority, the Jews, of course, and the rest of them, whatever. But I travel a lot. And what I discovered is actually that if I want to define broadly and generally speaking the nature of American Jewry, I will say it's religious style, which means it's Seder at the White House and menorah at Times Square and Bar Mitzvah is the family gathering, and it's all about religious, a lot of it is about religious symbols. Israeli definition of Judaism is running around issues of nationalism, like we discussed earlier. What is the new definition of the nation? But at the end of the day, none of them defines me. And what I'm missing, very painfully, I'm missing European Jewry. European Jewry was not necessarily, and again, broadly speaking, we're not about details here, was not, at least Central European Jewry, at least the German Yekische one, was not necessarily religious and not necessarily national or nationalistic. It was a body of ideas. It was a container or a producer of so many ideas. Reform movement, Orthodox movement, conservative one, psychology, communism, you name it. All somehow came from there. And for me, Jewish identity, or for me being a Jew, is mainly live in a world of ideas rather than of these solid definitions. Now, I take it a step further. I'm an accidental Jew. I do not believe that only were I born to the Dalai Lama, so at the age of 8 days I would have circumcised myself alone, voluntarily. Neither do I believe that only were I born to the Pope, I would have put tefillin on at the age of 13. Accidentally, I was born a Jew. It's an accident. I do not believe in choseness. I do not believe in destiny and God and divine intervention and all of this kind of Jewish voodoo mambo-jumbo. I'm not into this. And I'm not into this superiority and all of these package of problems that content-wise we are having. Accidentally, I was born a Jew. It's a relative term. It is not an absolute term. There are absolute columns in my life: world, humanity, nature, values, etc. So I try to impact the absolute pillar of life with my relative identity. And he tries to do it with his Christian relativity, and she tries to do it with her Muslim or Shinto or Buddhist or whatever it is. And all of these relative identities are creating the world kaleidoscope, which is humanity. Nobody is superior and nobody is inferior when it comes to identity or spirituality or the definition of the self. This kind of definition of Judaism is for sure not the majority definition of the Israelis. And in that sense, somebody once defined me, and I was insulted at the time, but it was a very complimenting insult. He said, Avraham Burg is an Israeli who tries to re-become a Jew. So in a way, yes, my Jewishness is my humanity. I know it didn't answer your question.
Okay, well, I think that that's a great note upon which to end. So let us thank Mr. Burg for an engaging couple of hours. And thank all of you for engagement.